Can you imagine a wave of molasses 8 meters high roaring through a major city? It sounds like something out of a bizarre dream, but on January 15, 1919, this nightmare became a reality for the people of Boston. This is the story of the Great Molasses Flood, one of the strangest and most tragic disasters in American history. Our story begins in Boston's North End, a bustling neighborhood packed with homes, businesses, and a busy waterfront. Dominating the skyline was a colossal steel tank, 5 stories tall, owned by the Purity Distilling Company. This tank was an absolute monster, capable of holding over 2 million gallons of molasses. Now you might be wondering, why so much molasses? Well, in the early 20th century, molasses was a hot commodity. It was a key ingredient in making industrial alcohol, which was then used to produce munitions for World War I. Even after the war ended, the demand remained high. The tank itself was a relatively new structure, built just a few years earlier in 1915. But from the very beginning, it was plagued with problems. Residents living nearby complained constantly. They reported loud groaning and creaking sounds coming from the tank, especially when it was being filled. Even more alarming, dark, sticky streams of molasses would often ooze from the seams. Local kids would bring cups and sticks to collect the sweet leakage as a treat. The company knew about these leaks. Their solution? They painted the tank brown to better camouflage the dark stains. They completely ignored the clear warning signs that something was fundamentally wrong with its construction. January 15, 1919, started as an unusually warm winter day in Boston. The temperature rose sharply, reaching over 4 degrees Celsius. This sudden warmth was a critical factor. For the molasses stored inside the tank, the temperature change caused it to expand. This, combined with the tank's already shoddy construction and the fact that it had recently been filled to near capacity, created a perfect storm. The pressure inside the tank was building to a catastrophic level. Around 12:30 in the afternoon, lunch hour was in full swing. The streets were filled with people, horses, and wagons. Firefighters at the nearby Engine 31 firehouse were relaxing, enjoying a game of cards. Workers at the City Public Works building were eating their lunch. Suddenly, without any warning, the ground began to tremble. Witnesses reported hearing a deep, rumbling sound, followed by a series of rapid-fire pops, like machine gun fire. These were the sounds of the rivets on the giant molasses tank failing, one by one. Then the tank exploded. It didn't just leak. It completely ruptured. The steel walls tore apart, unleashing a tidal wave of 2.3 million gallons of thick brown molasses. This wasn't a slow-moving ooze. This was a ferocious 25-foot-high wall of liquid, weighing thousands of tons, traveling at an estimated 35 miles per hour. It crashed through the neighborhood with the force of a tsunami. The wave of destruction was instantaneous and horrifying. The sheer force of the molasses was enough to lift buildings off their foundations and smash them to pieces. The elevated railway track nearby was severely damaged, nearly causing a train to derail. A freight car was picked up and tossed into the harbor. Entire homes were flattened. The Engine 31 firehouse was pushed back on its foundation, trapping the firefighters inside. The human toll was even more devastating. People on the streets had no time to react. They were completely engulfed by the sticky tide. Horses pulling wagons were swept away, struggling and drowning in the viscous goo. Men, women, and children were trapped. The molasses was so thick and heavy that once you were caught in it, escape was nearly impossible. It was like being stuck in quicksand. The wave rushed through the streets, covering everything in a sticky brown coating that was several feet deep in some areas. As the wave finally lost its momentum, a surreal and terrifying silence fell over the North End, broken only by the cries of the injured and trapped. The scene was apocalyptic. The air was thick with the sickly smell of molasses. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and the streets were an impassable river of sludge. The initial shock quickly turned into a massive rescue effort. Sailors from the USS Nantucket, which was docked nearby, were among the first to arrive. They waded into the sticky mess, pulling survivors from the debris. Firefighters, police, and hundreds of ordinary citizens joined in, working frantically to save anyone they could. The rescue was incredibly difficult. The molasses was waist-deep in some places, and the cold winter air was causing it to thicken, making movement almost impossible. Rescuers struggled to get a footing, and many became stuck themselves. They worked for hours, through the day and into the night, using whatever they could find to pry people from the sticky grip of the molasses. They pulled out more than 150 injured people, many suffering from broken bones, concussions, and asphyxiation. Sadly, for 21 people, help came too late. They suffocated or were crushed by the debris. The cleanup was a monumental task. It took over 87,000 man-hours to remove the molasses from the streets, buildings, and the harbor. Crews used salt water from fire hoses to wash it away and sand to absorb it. For weeks, everything in Boston was sticky. The molasses was tracked all over the city on people's shoes. It got onto subway platforms, into homes, and onto public telephones. The entire city smelled of molasses for months. It's said that on hot summer days, for decades afterward, you could still smell a faint, sweet scent in the North End. In the aftermath, everyone wanted to know what went wrong. How could a tank of molasses cause so much death and destruction? The Purity Distilling Company, which was owned by the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, tried to blame the explosion on anarchists, claiming a bomb had been planted. This was a common tactic at the time, but it didn't hold up. The victims and their families filed a class action lawsuit against the company, one of the first of its kind in Massachusetts. The legal battle lasted for years. The company brought in their own experts to support the sabotage theory. But the plaintiff's lead investigator, Arthur D. Little, conducted a thorough scientific investigation. He meticulously examined the failed steel plates from the tank and reviewed its construction records. What he found was damning. The tank was a disaster waiting to happen. It was built quickly and cheaply. The steel was too thin to hold the immense pressure of that much molasses. The rivets were not up to standard. The company had not performed basic safety tests, like filling the tank with water first, which was standard practice. They had rushed the construction and cut corners at every turn to maximize profits. The frequent leaks were a clear sign the tank was structurally unsound, but the company willfully ignored them. After 3 years of testimony, the court-appointed auditor finally released his verdict. He concluded that the tank was improperly designed, poorly constructed, and that the company was entirely at fault. The United States Industrial Alcohol Company was ordered to pay what would be the equivalent of millions of dollars in damages to the victims and their families. The Great Molasses Flood of 1919 was more than just a bizarre historical footnote. It became a landmark case that had a lasting impact on American society. The disaster exposed the deadly consequences of corporate negligence and the lack of government oversight in industrial construction. As a direct result, laws across the country were changed. Municipalities began to require that all construction plans for large structures be signed and sealed by a certified engineer. Stricter regulations and more rigorous inspections for building projects became the new norm. In a way, the tragedy in Boston helped to build a foundation for modern engineering safety standards, protecting countless lives in the decades that followed. Today, the site of the former molasses tank is a public park with a baseball field and a playground. A small, discreet plaque is the only official marker of the tragedy that unfolded there over a century ago. It's a quiet reminder of a day when a wave of molasses brought a city to its knees, a story of corporate greed, unimaginable horror, and a hard-won lesson in public safety. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating and tragic as I did, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history's most compelling events. See you next time